Michelle doesn't have a seat. What's going on? My husband asked Kimberly, looking puzzled. There's no way she would have one. Didn't I tell you? We're gathering the family for a celebration, Kimberly said with a malicious grin. Just family seats. Ah, now I get Kimberly's game. Present here are Kimberly's in-laws, our family, and the couple Samantha and her husband. She planned this to make it clear in front of all these guests that I'm not considered family. Unbelievable she'd concoct such a plan for her child's introduction party. So, if you're not family, could you kindly leave? How long had Kimberly been planning this day? Her determination completely erased any affection I had for her. Let's go. My husband stood up and said to me. Yes. I replied, and I was about to leave the room with Jeremy. Then disaster struck Kimberly. My name is Michelle Thompson. I'm a 51-year-old housewife. I lived with my husband and our 10-year-old son, Jeremy. Jeremy seems young for my age because I married late. I married at 40 and had him at 41. My husband was 47 at the time, making this his second marriage. It was after losing his first wife. He had a daughter named Kimberly from that marriage. She was 13 and in her first year of middle school when we married. Honestly, Kimberly and I don't get along well. It's understandable, given the awkwardness of adolescence and suddenly having a stranger join your family life. She may be your new wife, but she's not my mother. Kimberly told me outright, not hiding her resentment. My husband tried to correct her, but I understand how she feels. I lost my mother and then my father a few years later when I was a child. I was raised by my aunt and her husband. They were like parents but not quite the same. So, I accepted my role as my father's partner. I hoped we could eventually build a familial bond from there. But once we started living together, Kimberly's attitude towards me was truly awful. Hey you, wash the gym clothes for tomorrow's PE class. Your lunch looks so brown and old-fashioned, it's embarrassing. Don't bother making it anymore. Give me lunch money instead. Coming to my career counseling? No joke, don't you dare come. You're not my mom, so stop acting like it. Kimberly would say things like this all the time. I'm only tolerating you because Dad let you into this house. Honestly, just having a woman who used to be a waitress around is disgusting enough. I can barely stand it. One day, she bluntly demeaned me as a disgusting woman. The aunt and uncle who took me in owned a restaurant. It's true I worked as a waitress there. But it wasn't out of reluctance. I actually loved working at the restaurant and continued to do so until I got married. Kimberly, I take pride in my work at the restaurant. I understand you may dislike me, but I won't tolerate you disparaging that job. I found myself objecting to her words for the first time. It's still nightlife work. It's a lowly job. Kimberly wouldn't listen to my rebuttal and just locked herself in her room. Until then, I had remained silent no matter what was said, but this time I thought about telling my husband. However, I ended up not saying anything. That night, I suddenly felt ill and went to the hospital, where I found out I was pregnant. I had just turned 40. The joy and surprise of naturally conceiving at my age were overwhelming. My husband and I had decided not to pursue fertility treatments but to leave things as they were, partly because of Kimberly's presence. While I wasn't against having my own children, I didn't have a strong desire to marry initially. Having received such a precious connection, I thought it best to first be recognized as Kimberly's mother. When I shared the news, my husband was happy. But Kimberly was furious. This was a shotgun wedding, wasn't it? I know for a fact that you and Dad were in that kind of relationship even when my mom was alive. Kimberly stood up and slammed the table with both hands. Who told you that? That's not true. Kimberly, there's been some misunderstanding. Don't you dare call me Kimberly as if we're close. Her gaze pierced me as if I was something filthy. You just waited to get married because it would look bad otherwise, right? Who has been filling your head with these lies? It doesn't matter who. I just won't accept this child. Don't have it." Her words were so harsh that my husband got angry and they argued, leaving me feeling utterly miserable. I had imagined Kimberly might not be happy, but I never expected her to demand I not have the baby. After my husband took the time to talk to Kimberly calmly, it turned out her aunt and uncle had been filling her head with these notions. Kimberly's real mother had passed away 3 years ago, and since then, her aunt Samantha and her husband Edward had been frequenting our house. I had heard not so great things about this couple from my husband. Samantha and Edward were not very responsible and often couldn't hold down jobs. They would come to Kimberly's mother to ask for money when they were in trouble. I had advised against lending them money too often, but since they had lost their parents young and were only 2 sisters, she found it hard to refuse. My husband spoke vaguely, but his tone suggested he preferred not to continue associating with them deeply. When her real mother became ill, Kimberly was still in elementary school, in the lower grades. My husband tried his best to take care of her, but it was impossible to do it alone. That's when Samantha and her husband offered to help with Kimberly. "Brother, Kimberly is my sister's precious only daughter. Since we're neighbors, let us help out, please." "That's right, aren't we family? We don't have children, so we think of Kimberly as our own." Believing their words that they wanted to take care of their blood-related niece and help in place of her mother, we discovered over time that Samantha and her husband had been taking money and gifts from Kimberly. My husband had confided in me that this was one of the reasons he considered remarrying. It seems that these two had been poisoning Kimberly against me, saying things like, "She's just a shady woman who flatters men, coming from the nightlife business. It seems she had that kind of relationship with your father even when your mother was alive. You should never call such a woman mom." Kimberly believed what her doting aunt and uncle told her, and that's why she treated me the way she did. Fed up, my husband gave Samantha and her husband a final warning. "We've kept quiet about the small things because you were looking after young Kimberly, but if you spread lies again, we'll sue for defamation." Intimidated by my husband's threat, Samantha and her husband hurriedly started to correct themselves to Kimberly. "It's not what we meant. We just said that not all waitresses are bad. We didn't mean Michelle. We've known her for a long time through work. That's all we meant by saying she was an acquaintance of your mother before she passed. And to have a honeymoon baby, you're lucky to be blessed with a child so soon." The more they tried to excuse themselves, the less genuine they seemed, but since they came to apologize like this, I decided to forgive them this once. However, Kimberly's mistrust towards me couldn't be completely cleared, and we continued to live together in a cold relationship for many years. Later, I gave birth to my son safely. While Kimberly never called me mom, she ended up living with us as a family, perhaps because we banned Samantha and her husband from visiting, leaving her no choice but to accept my care. Our interactions were formal, but at least the days passed in surface-level peace. It seems she acknowledged Jeremy as her brother, at least. And she even took care of him somewhat affectionately. Then, 10 years passed, and one day, when Kimberly was 23, she announced she was getting married. To a college classmate. I didn't know, but they had been dating since college and decided to get married. "We're going to have our wedding ceremony abroad, just the two of us." They planned to go to a tropical island for their honeymoon and have a private ceremony there. I momentarily wondered if they chose not to invite anyone because they didn't want me there. But then I remembered that my husband and I had our ceremony at a chapel during our honeymoon trip. It seems such styles are quite popular among young people nowadays. I sincerely wished them well. Kimberly and her husband started their life near his parents' home. Eventually, Kimberly informed us she was pregnant, and in due time, she gave birth to a baby girl. To Jeremy, she was his niece. And to us, our first grandchild. When I contacted them about wanting to give a birth gift, this was the reply. "We're gathering family for a baby viewing party, please come then." Given what was said, we decided to hold off on the celebration until then. They had mentioned waiting until her health was back after giving birth, but if there was going to be such a day, it seemed best to attend then. And then the day of the showcase arrived. The venue was a party room in a well-known restaurant, famous for being hard to book. Securing the venue there must have been difficult, despite its reputation. Upon inquiry, I learned that Green Foods, where Kimberly had married into, supplied food to that restaurant, and through that connection, they managed to secure the venue for 2 hours this afternoon. My husband, Jeremy, and I were guided to the venue. Indeed, it was a splendid room. The venue was filled with relatives from Kimberly's marital side, business associates, and guests looked forward to enjoying the restaurant's cuisine. Our relatives were there too. It was inevitable that Samantha and her husband were invited. They were Kimberly's maternal aunt and uncle after all. Upon entering the room, I noticed there was no seat for me. While there was a seat for Jeremy at the same table as my husband, my name tag was nowhere to be found.
Michelle doesn't have a seat. What's going on?
My husband asked Kimberly, looking puzzled.
There's no way she would have one. Didn't I tell you? We're gathering the family for a celebration,
Kimberly said with a malicious grin.
Just family seats.
Ah, now I get Kimberly's scheme. By rejecting me in a public setting, she intended to declare that I'm not considered family. I couldn't believe she'd orchestrate such a thing at her child's introduction party.
So, if you're not family, could you kindly leave?
At those words, her husband, Scott, and his parents were visibly flustered. I've been tolerating things up until now, but I have to protect this child, so I've been putting up with a lot. Holding her newborn daughter close, Kimberly continued tearfully, loud enough for all the guests to hear.
Father, Mother, and Scott. I've never said this before, but this woman stole my father from my real mother and wormed her way into our house.
All eyes in the venue were on me.
Back then, I was still in school. Despite how much it hurt, I had no choice but to endure. My mother suffered because of it and it shortened her life.
The gaze of the guests quickly turned accusatory.
I always thought I'd show her one day. That's how I've lived all these years. Let me be clear, this person is not my family.
I had lived these 11 years thinking of Kimberly as my daughter. Despite knowing she hated me, I still cared for her as my daughter and Jeremy's sister.
Kimberly, you really endured a lot. I always thought you were bearing a lot too. In a way, this woman is the enemy of my sister. Kimberly came to us because she needed to protect her child from such a woman, and that's why we planned this.
As I suspected, Samantha and her husband were complicit. I wonder how long Kimberly had been planning this day. Her relentless determination completely erased any affection I had for her.
There's no truth to that. I explained it's all lies,
my husband said, his eyes widening with undisguised anger. Those two had been desperately apologizing at that time, but they must have continued communicating with Kimberly and concocted this plan together. Their faces bore smug smirks.
My father, in a way, is an accomplice. He would never speak ill of that woman. That's right. You has always been defending that woman. I felt sorry for Kimberly, being neglected by her own father like that.
The guests were completely fooled by their convincing performance. I had no allies here.
If Dad breaks up with that woman, I'll forgive everything. But if you continues to defend her, then you should prepare never to see his granddaughter again.
While saying this, Kimberly handed her baby over to the in-laws in a gesture that seemed to take the baby away from my husband. My husband stared at Kimberly's daughter for a while but eventually closed his eyes tightly, as if making a decision, then turned his back.
Are you sure about this? You'll never see your granddaughter again. Let's go.
My husband stood up and said to me,
Yes.
As I was about to leave the room with Jeremy, something unbelievable happened.
Yikes!
Kimberly's scream echoed through the showcase venue.
What are you doing?
Her face was covered in cream, looking like something out of a slapstick TV show.
Don't say bad things about Mom.
It seemed Jeremy had thrown the celebration cake at Kimberly's face.
Mom has always cared for you. Why would you say such terrible things?
Jeremy's face turned red with anger, tears brimming in his eyes.
How could you do this? Why do you keep lying, sister? Don't call me sister. I never once thought of you as my brother.
Shocked by her words, large tears rolled down from Jeremy's wide-open eyes. Jeremy. I instinctively hugged Jeremy tightly. I apologize for ruining what was supposed to be a celebratory occasion. My husband apologized to everyone in the venue. However, what Kimberly said earlier is not true. Michelle became my wife after Kimberly's mother passed away, a decision I made because she is a respectable person. I hope you can understand that. My husband said, casting a gentle gaze at me and Jeremy.
It doesn't matter why Kimberly started this. We will cut ties with her. My daughter might be imperfect, but I ask for your understanding.
As my husband and I were prompted to leave the room, a person who had just entered spoke to those remaining.
I'm Michael, the owner and chef of this restaurant. I'm sorry, but I must ask everyone to leave. The party is over. What? I am well acquainted with Michelle Thompson. She is a fine person. I refuse to serve my food to anyone who speaks so ill of her. Please leave.
Michael's words caused a stir in the venue, and Kimberly raised her voice in anger.
How can you say such a thing? What's your relationship with that woman? Maybe you're also deceived by her. I trained as a chef for many years at Michelle's family's traditional inn before starting this restaurant.
Yes. I've known owner Chef Michael since I was a child. He was also training back then and often treated me kindly when I was taken in by my aunt and uncle.
I still keep in touch with the owners of the inn, and I'm well aware of Michelle's character.
Michael has become a renowned chef, well known in culinary circles. His words shifted the mood in the room. The guests started murmuring. They were unsure of whom to believe.
I am well acquainted not only with Michelle but also with Kimberly's father, Thomas. I want to share the truth as a third party.
Michael explained my relationship with my husband. My husband was a regular at the inn run by my aunt for over 20 years. He was always just a customer and employee relationship. He worked in sales. He brought various clients to the inn for entertainment. Initially, he came as a young salesman with his boss, but eventually, he rose through the ranks and started bringing his own subordinates. During the time I helped at the inn, my husband got married, had a family, became a father, and then lost his wife. His wife passed. When I heard it from my aunt, I was sad, but beyond expressing my condolences, I didn't have any other emotions, just treated him as a regular customer who had suffered a loss. However, I was surprised when an old regular brought up a marriage proposal out of the blue.
The mediator of the proposal is now a regular of our restaurant, who asked for my opinion. Of course, I said it was a good match.
Due to certain circumstances, I had publicly declared I wouldn't marry. It was a proposal from someone who knew my situation well. Why would you propose knowing my stance? I initially felt annoyed. They insisted on discussing it despite knowing I was upset.
Thomas was concerned about Samantha and her husband. He heard they were a bad influence on Kimberly and started considering remarriage.
He has a daughter entering middle school, worried about her future given her environment. He thought a mother figure was necessary for her proper upbringing. That was what he said. But the mediator opposed the idea of remarrying for such reasons. He advised Thomas to think of his own happiness first. If you seek a partner for the purpose of leading a happy life yourself, then I support that decision. Marrying just to provide a mother for his child would be unfair to the partner. Thomas took this advice to heart and decided he wanted to remarry.
I believe showing Kimberly that I can be happy is also for her benefit. That's why I decided to remarry.
Hearing this, the mediator recommended me to Thomas.
Michelle was quite troubled by the proposal. I heard about it from the introducer. Yes, I was deeply conflicted. It's a very personal matter, so I won't explain it here, but I had resolved never to marry.
When I was younger, I had someone I considered marrying. My aunt and uncle didn't want to decide my life for me, so they supported me through college and even suggested that getting a job and seeing the world first would be good for me. That person was a client I met through my job. Though I had taken a job, my true desire was to work at the inn, and when I confided this, they encouraged me to follow my heart. He offered my support and respect for my decision. Encouraged by those words, I decided to marry that person. We held an engagement announcement party at my aunt's inn, inviting regular patrons to introduce them as my future spouse. It was the happiest time in my life. However, that happiness collapsed suddenly like a castle of sand. It turned out this person was already married with children and had lied about being single. They said they intended to divorce, but how could I trust someone who lied about such a fundamental thing? At that time, I discovered I was pregnant with their child. But I miscarried, possibly due to the stress. Because of this experience, I decided never to marry or have children again. The person who recommended me to my husband knew all about this and still brought me the proposal. He hoped both of us could find happiness once more. He wished for us to marry. He passionately argued. I knew my husband as a customer and trusted his character. But I had never once considered him as a potential spouse. As I was contemplating what to do, my aunt and uncle told me they thought it wasn't a bad idea and suggested I should consider it. In the process of meeting my future husband several times, just the two of us, I started to feel that maybe I could be happy with this person. My husband felt the same, and after many deep conversations, we decided to get married. That's why there's absolutely no truth to the claims that we were close while Kimberly's mother was still alive or that she suffered because of my presence. I stated firmly. My wife is right. While it's true we've known each other for many years, our relationship was strictly that of staff at the inn and a customer. If you find it hard to believe, we wouldn't mind inviting the person who brought us together here. Michael mentioned, and the mention of that name caused a stir in the venue. It was the chairman of a globally recognized corporation, known to everyone. I believe this clarifies that the earlier accusations were completely unfounded and intended to discredit us. The audience seemed convinced. What about the president of Green Foods, his wife, and Kimberly's husband? How do they feel? It appears we were too quick to believe only Kimberly and her aunt and uncle's side of the story. Scott admitted with a look of regret, and the in-laws also expressed their belief in our side. That's a relief. If you still believed Kimberly and her aunt and uncle's story, we were considering reassessing our future dealings. Michael said, causing Scott and the in-laws' faces to go pale. Michael's restaurant has a business relationship with them. That benefited their company significantly. If that business were cut off, it could pose a serious problem for the company's future. With things having come to this point, it's impossible to continue the party. Perhaps it's best to call it a night. Yes, that's a good idea. Everyone, we apologize for causing such a disturbance today. Michael, it's such a feast. I'm sorry, but could you please arrange for the guests to take the food home? Michael, upon hearing Scott's request, instructed his staff. The staff began packing the food into takeout containers, distributing them politely to the guests as they left. Surprisingly, when Samantha and her husband tried to receive their share, the staff refused them. Give it to us. We're guests too. That's right. The main characters are our niece and her daughter. I'm sorry, but we cannot provide anything for you. From now on, we will not be associating with you in any manner. Scott hurried over amid the commotion and promptly escorted Samantha and her husband out. This restaurant is kicking out customers with such disrespect? We'll sue you for this. That's right. We are the aunts and uncles of today's star. You should treat us better. We'll leave the worst review online. Samantha and her husband were loudly complaining, but I'd like to see what they plan to sue for. Doing something like that might just get them sued instead. It's almost pitiable how desperate they were to eat the food here. Kimberly's in-laws apologized to us. They had no idea Kimberly and Samantha and her husband were plotting such a thing. Regarding the absence of my seat, they were told by Kimberly. I'm disliked by my mother. I invited her today, but she refused. They were moved to tears by the complaint, thinking what kind of mother that made me. Kimberly badmouthed me whenever possible, expressing relief at leaving the house and feeling genuinely happy to be accepted by her in-laws. She also apparently wanted a wedding abroad with just the two of them because she didn't want to invite me. The in-laws, feeling sorry for her, allowed it. This grandchild's showcase was meant to formally introduce Kimberly as a family member to work colleagues and relatives out of kindness. But it turned into a terrible scene, for which I feel truly sorry. My husband declared disownment to Kimberly, now covered in cake. I've always said not to trust them too much, but you chose to believe those two over us and caused this. We're cutting ties with you. Dad, that's terrible. How much more will you be deceived by that woman? Don't you care about your own daughter? It's not true. I added to my husband's words. Your father thinks of you as a precious daughter, which is why he hoped you wouldn't believe the lies told by Samantha and her husband. I don't want to hear from you. You can hate me all you want, but I can't forgive you as a mother for what you said to Jeremy, your blood-related brother who adored you. Tears welled up in my husband's eyes as he heard my words. His daughter hurt his son. That must be agonizing. Michelle is right. You and Jeremy were both precious children to me, but that ends today. As I said earlier, from now on, we are strangers to you. Kimberly collapsed, weakened by my husband's words. We're cutting ties, but she's still our precious daughter. You may think we're too lenient, but for the sake of our grandchild, if possible, we hope something can be worked out. My husband turned to the in-laws and said, this was the last thing we could do as Kimberly's parents. The in-laws mentioned they need to consider what to do about Kimberly and Scott moving forward. Scott silently listened to his parents' words. But that's no longer something we can have a say in. It's possible that this could end in the worst way, but that's no longer something we can have a say in. Everything is now in the hands of Kimberly's family. We thanked Michael and left the restaurant. It was truly grateful for all his help on this occasion. We plan to visit again to properly express our gratitude. From today, our family will just be my husband, Jeremy, and me. It's as if our daughter Kimberly never existed. That's okay. I feel as though I've been released from an 11-year curse, feeling completely refreshed. After getting home, my husband deleted all of Kimberly's contact information. And he blocked her phone numbers and accounts. While I planned to sever all ties with Kimberly as well, the thoroughness of my husband's actions made me somewhat uneasy. However, I also felt that such drastic measures were necessary to prevent our determination from wavering. From the expression on my husband's face as he worked, I could understand his feelings. Scott later reached out to inform us. For the moment, divorce had been avoided. But with conditions. Kimberly is to have absolutely no contact with Samantha and her husband. If any contact is discovered, they will proceed with a divorce immediately. He had them sign an agreement and a divorce paper, which he is keeping on file. Kimberly apparently told her in-laws the entire truth about everything. Samantha and her husband had promised her our house if they succeeded in driving me out. They intended to live here, acting as managers, and have Kimberly pay them a salary. Kimberly had convinced her in-laws she was cherished and well cared for by Samantha and her husband since she was a child, completely fooling them. Scott apologized for this, but it's no longer our concern. We chose to only accept his words. 3 years have passed since that showcase event. Unfortunately, Kimberly was divorced and expelled from the Green family. Despite her assertions, she couldn't sever ties with Samantha and her husband. And she was caught meeting them secretly, leading to her husband disowning her. Kimberly's daughter is now in the care of the in-laws, with Kimberly not allowed any visitation rights. It seems she finally felt true regret, but it was too late. She desperately apologized to her husband and begged for reconciliation, but was not forgiven and now works at an inn in the countryside. Kimberly once scorned my work at the inn. She was now doing that very job herself. It's an ironic outcome. The hard work must be a challenge for Kimberly, who lived a life without hardships. It's unfortunate but a consequence of her own actions. Whether she reflects on her actions through hard physical work or still views it as demeaning remains unknown. Regardless, it's no longer our concern. We probably won't ever see her again. In my heart, I've bid farewell to Kimberly, who I once thought of as my daughter. To distance ourselves from Kimberly, we sold our house and moved. My husband resigned from his job, and now we work together at my aunt's inn. Kimberly, who wanted nothing to do with me, likely has no idea which inn it might be. Even if she were to find out, my husband insists he wouldn't accept her, but I suspect it would be painful to actually see her. For both our sakes, it's better not to know. My husband was an exceptional salesman. Thanks to him, our inn has flourished even more, becoming a renowned establishment recognized not just in USA but internationally, similar to Michael's restaurant. As the next landlady, I'm dedicating myself to daily training. While I hoped Jeremy would pursue whatever he's passionate about, it turns out he's interested in the inn's management and wants to take over someday. He's still just a 13-year-old boy. So his interests could change, but I'm holding on to some hope.
Jeremy will surely make a great successor. You've raised him to be such a kind and honest boy, thank you. You're truly a wonderful mother.
My husband says with a smile.
Yes, he certainly will. He's your son, after all. Thank you for being such a great father.
I reply genuinely, smiling back. Happiness depends on one's state of mind. If we proceed with pure hearts and clear intentions, the path forward will surely open up. Now, it's just about walking this bright path ahead of us with my husband and Jeremy, as a family of 3. Hand in hand, with smiles on our faces, we will continue walking together as a family.